Hi, everybody. This is Josh Nelson from Keystone Financial Services. We're going to get started right here at 11:30 Mountain Time today. Thank you for tuning in, by the way. I know we've got a few more people that are going to be jumping on the call here within the next few minutes. So right now, we'll just do some housekeeping while we're waiting. We do have a couple of features within GoToWebinar that are helpful to communicate with me along the way. One of those is that you've got a questions box and you've got a chat box. And those will allow you to communicate any questions if you're having any problems seeing my stuff. If you're not seeing my slides, something like that, certainly let me know, and that way I can address it as we go. Today we're going to be going over Social Security, which is a hot topic always because it has huge implications based off of how old you are, what your marital status is. You could be leaving a lot of money on the table if you don't understand the rules. So we're going to be going through that here in just a couple minutes. We'll give people about 2 more minutes and get started right at 11:30. If somebody could do me a favor while we're waiting, actually, if somebody could put in the questions box or the chat box, if you guys could just type hi or hi Josh or Merry Christmas or whatever you want to say, that would be helpful just to make sure that I know that you know how to use those tools, you know that they're there, and we can communicate during the presentation. While we're waiting too, we've got about 1 more minute. You also have along the way, you've got the ability to take a free gift that I've given you. That's a handout in the handout section of GoToWebinar in the toolbar. There is a key financial data piece there that I think you're going to find helpful, not only because it goes through and talks about tax brackets, kind of for year-end tax planning, of course, and then tax planning as you get into tax season, but also it talks about limits as far as Social Security, retirement contributions, HSAs, things that are all pretty relevant. So feel free to grab that and use that PDF as you're planning. We usually get the new ones about the 4th week or so of January, early February. So those will be the 2019 version after all the rules have been finalized for the year. So we'll have those available as well. As we come up on 11:30, we're going to get started here. I am recording this, by the way, so hopefully you can see me right now. And I can see a couple people dialed in here and said, hi, Josh. Thank you. Appreciate you doing that. So we are going to be going through Social Security, which is a topic that we could really spend hours on. Believe me, there's so many different rules and gotchas that come with Social Security benefits that we really could spend a lot of time. I'm respecting everybody's lunch hour because I know, especially this week, right? It's Christmas week. So I know people are really busy. You've got to go back to work, whatever you've got going on your day. So I am going to move through relatively quickly on the presentation. But again, we're recording it, so you can go back and listen to it again. You can pass it on to a coworker or family member or friend. So that's why we record these as well. We actually find that we have more people that end up watching them not live, where they watch the recorded versions, because chances are when we're doing it right now, 11:30 Mountain Time, might not work for them. They might have a meeting through work, or they might be traveling. So we do have a lot of people dial into on the recorded version, and I always want to get feedback from you as far as what's helpful, because those are the topics that I want to make sure that we're addressing. We've had Social Security come up a couple different times over the last month in conversations with clients, and we thought that we would run it through again because the rules have changed, and it's important to understand that. Because, again, you could be leaving a lot of money on the table if you don't understand the rules. Of course, we could say that with a lot of things, right? Not just Social Security, but other things like Medicare, your employee benefits, the tax code, the estate laws. Those are all really critical pieces of the financial planning process. And people don't mean to screw up, right? People don't mean to make mistakes in their financial life, but they do. And it's not because they want to, it's just because they don't understand the rules. And there's a lot to understand. So that's why you've got financial experts like me, right, in Keystone Financial, because we can stay up on this stuff and make sure that we're applying it to your situation. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and turn off the webcam for right now. We're going to go through and hit the presentation hard here. Again, I know some of this can get a little bit wonky and in the weeds, so you'll have to bear with me, but it's an important topic. And at least what I'm hoping is that there'll be a couple of people hopefully everybody is able to take away one or two bits of information that you at least know to ask a question or know to apply it to your situation. Or it could be that you've got a family member or a friend that really needs to know. I can tell you, doing this for a lot of years, I'm coming up on 20 years now as a financial advisor, and oftentimes how people make their financial decisions is they will make the decision based off of one of two things: either their gut feeling, in other words, their emotions, and that oftentimes, as tempting as it might be, gut feelings when it comes to money, finance, not a good way to make decisions. Usually that will actually lead you the opposite direction of where you want to be. I just had coffee with a client this morning, and he said, yeah, my friend, we've got some market volatility right now, right? We're in a market correction, is the technical term for it. But he said, yeah, I've got a coworker I was talking to, and he just keeps watching the market and watching his investments, and he put on a whole bunch of risk not that long ago, and of course he's lost money, and now he wants to sell out because he's afraid. And I thought that was actually a good illustration, because people's emotions will usually lead them to do the opposite of what they should be doing in the market or in a lot of different financial decisions. So it's either that, or they just follow what their neighbor says, their dad says, their coworker says, and of course that may not be the best situation for them, right? It could be that their financial situation, their family situation is different, so the taxes would be different, the estate laws would be different as far as how they would apply to that person. So that being said, we'll go ahead and jump on here into securing your retirement. It's really, look at it as a game. Really look at this as a game that you want to win. And of course, we can't predict the future. We can guess the future, but it's important to think about this as a game and one that you do want to win. You don't want to just guess on this stuff. So we're going to talk about a couple of things just to get started. Part of the context here is that this is a different challenge than what people's parents and grandparents faced typically, because people are living so much longer. And you can see on my chart here, for example, it shows that a married couple age 65 and 65 today, right? They're 65 today, and the statistics are that there's about 10,000 people turning 65 each day, which means that there's a huge, huge lump of people that are going into retirement or will be retiring soon if they're not already. But you can see in that married couple that there's actually a 50% chance that one of those two people will make it to 93, and a 25% chance that one of them will make it to 98. Those numbers have been going up dramatically over the years, over the last 20 years that I've been an advisor. I think that's going to continue. The reason why I think it's going to continue to go up is that medical technology is having a transformative effect on how long people are living and the quality of life that they're experiencing. So recognize that we're talking about people living much longer, which means the stakes are much higher when it comes to Social Security planning. Also, you can see there in an individual, for example, individual 65-year-old female has a 50% chance of making it to 89. So you might say, well, I'm not married. And why does that even matter? Well, it matters because of the way that you can collect your benefits and the survivor benefits that you may be eligible for if you've been married or if you're married currently. That could impact you. So the other thing that we need to recognize is that most people do take their benefits before full retirement age. And for today's definition, we're going to use age 66 as full retirement age. We'll talk about that here in a bit, but just to make it easy and to keep us all on the same page, we're going to assume full retirement age is age 66. So that means that 71% of people have collected early, and you can collect as early as 62. As age 62 in most circumstances. Sometimes there's a way to take money even earlier than that, but generally age 62 is the earliest age. And so it's a 70-30 split roughly. The rest of the population waits until full retirement age or later. They could even wait beyond that. And we'll talk about that with regard to not only what happens when you draw early or later, but how does that apply to you? We're actually going to go through some examples so you can see how that could make sense. The one thing I'll note here, too, before I forget, because I might forget, is that I'm going to offer to everybody on the call today, either in person or virtually, if we need to get on a call or do a screen share, offering everybody a Social Security analysis performed by our team that will help you see exactly what your benefits would be at certain ages and what your break-even points would be. Oftentimes, that's the real question people are asking, is not just when should I draw, but the reason why they're asking that question is they want to know when should I draw, and if I weren't taking it early, how long would I have to live to make it pay off? In other words, to not have gotten that smaller amount of money early. So let's talk about the rules. Again, all this stuff, we could be talking about any financial planning topic right now. And what I would tell you is that the most important thing is understanding the rules and then applying it to your situation. And again, most people don't understand the rules, and so they just make a decision based off of what their neighbor says or based off of just a gut feeling at the time. And we work with a lot of engineers, a lot of really smart people, and people that they want to make a good decision. They want to make a good informed decision, whatever it is that they decide. So this might look familiar for, I think, all of us. We've probably seen one of these. At least this is the page 2 of the document called your Social Security Benefit Statement. And that statement will list a number of years, and it's kind of interesting, right, especially for those of us who have been working for a while. I was trying to remember. I'll have to ask my mom, but I think my first job was 10 or 11, something like that, as a paper boy. So you have to go back a ways, obviously, at this point, but it's interesting to look at that record and see how your earnings have changed over time. So earnings record is listed there. The best 35 years is what they will factor into the Social Security formula. That's important because there's a lot of misconceptions out there. The most frequent one that I hear is that it's only the top 3 years or top 5 years, or it's your last 3 years or your last 5 years of work. That's not true. For Social Security purposes, it's your best 35 years. So for people who have been working longer than that, they'll actually take the best of those years. To use my dad as an example, my dad still is working right now, at least on a part-time basis, and he actually will hit his 50th year next year with the same company, believe it or not. And he was teaching even a few years before that. So he's got a very long earnings record, but they would only take the best 35 years to average in what he's actually going to receive or what he is receiving in a benefit right now. The other thing that you'll notice is that there's a little amount. I know the slides can be small, so I blew it up for you. You can see that there's 3 amounts. So if we're doing the Social Security analysis for you, and again, there's no obligation, we're happy to do that. And give you that report in a PDF free of charge. But a couple different pieces of information we'll need to know. One of those is your date of birth. Number 2 is your spouse's date of birth if you're married. And for that simple analysis, then we would just need to know these 3 amounts from each of your Social Security statements or your individual Social Security statement if you're not married. So those 3 amounts would be drawing at age 62, drawing at age 70, and then drawing at your full retirement age. So based off of when you were born, that'll determine when your full retirement age is. Again, later on, we're going to be doing some illustrations. So just know that all of those are assuming age 66. So if you say, well, you know what, I haven't seen one of these statements, that's because they haven't been sending them to you, at least very often. They used to send them every year for everybody, and then the Social Security Administration figured out that, hey, we need to cut costs, and so then they stopped sending them to everybody, and then the only way to see them was to go online. And then they changed the rules again, and now I believe it's every year now, as long as you haven't started collecting benefits every year after you turn age 60, it's around your birthday. Within a few months of your birthday, they're going to send you a paper statement from Social Security, unless you've opted in to the online statements on SSA.gov or socialsecurity.gov. It gets you to the same spot. But on there, you will be able to pull this statement. This is really the only page that matters, at least for our illustration purposes, to be able to run that report for you. So it's just a moment in time, obviously, but for right now, let's just assume that you have gotten that statement then, either the paper statement or you've gone online and gotten it. Usually you can get that within a few minutes. If you've never created a login at SSA.gov, you can do it. You plug in your information. Sometimes people get hung up, by the way, because they will ask you some questions that are publicly available information. For example, what vehicle, what color was the Ford Taurus you drove back in 1999, things like that. So if you don't answer the questions correctly, that could get you hung up. Worst case scenario, you may have to actually go to the Social Security office in your community and they can pull it for you there. You probably just have to bring some identifying information, driver's license. I'm not sure if they require anything else, a social security card or birth certificate, something like that. But nonetheless, you have to identify yourself, and then they can pull it manually if need be. So enough said. So basically, the deal is that you've got three key amounts. Those three key amounts on the last statement are the age 62 amount, the full retirement age amount, and then the age 70 amount. So everything kind of starts off of that full retirement age amount, which means that if you draw early, that means you receive a reduced benefit. If you wait, you receive a increased benefit. And that middle amount is called the primary insurance amount, or the PIA. So that's where everything starts off of, is the PIA. So again, we talked about that for certain people, if you were born 1937 or earlier, it's actually age 65. So it was a little bit earlier, maybe for some older folks, or maybe for your parents, it could have been age 65. But then as people, as the years went on, they, being politicians, figured out that, hey, people are living longer, and this is going to be tough for the system to be able to maintain this over time. So we need to raise those ages to account for the fact that people are living longer. So that's why the difference in the amounts. So the years 1937 or earlier, age 65, as you go up, you can see that it's 1943 to 54, age 66, and then 1960 and later is 67. If you're in between there, it just means that it's 66 and 3 months, 66 and 4 months, something like that, as far as the full retirement age. So if you wanted to wait until your full retirement age to draw benefits and get the maximum kind of normal full retirement benefit, you might have to wait a few more months, in other words, to be able to get them. So as of right now, the latest you would have to wait is age 67. I think we could all agree that it's probably going to go up from there. It's probably going to get adjusted for people in my generation or younger generations. People will have to wait longer, but that legislation hasn't come down at this point. So there's some cost to taking the benefit early. And right now, all we're talking about is just kind of a single individual, right? Just your own individual benefits. So we're not even worried about survivor benefits or spousal benefits or anything like that. So let's just assume that you wanted to know, well, what's the consequence? Basically, if I took it before age 66, again, we'll assume that that's your full retirement age. How much of a hit would I take, in other words? So it's roughly 7% each year of a hit that you end up taking as you draw it early. And the reason why it's important to think about this is because of that first slide that we looked at, the longevity, because we're not just talking about a short amount of time. A generation or two ago, this was not a problem, by the way, back when Social Security was first introduced. This really didn't cover that many people, right? Because more or less people, they retired because they were forced to, right? There really wasn't a choice where they had to stop farming or they had to stop working in the factory or whatever they were doing at the time. So they were kind of forced into retirement. And frankly, people didn't live that long, really. People didn't live that long after they would have started collecting benefits. So back then, it really wasn't that big of a deal. Now it is. So you do take about a 7% per year hit. Things to think about. Are you actually retiring? That's important because you actually do get reduced benefits. We'll talk about this here in a second. But think about that. Are you actually retiring? Will you be doing any kind of work after full retirement age or before full retirement age? You have to think about that and how it might affect your benefits. For example, again, my dad, who's 74, he's actually still working right now, but he didn't collect benefits until after full retirement age. There's some implications there. Certainly thinking about health, that's a big factor. Certainly thinking about longevity, your personal health, maybe looking at family members, your parents, grandparents, siblings, aunts, uncles, kind of thinking about your genetics. And obviously we all want to take care of ourselves, but sometimes we've got some genetic disposition towards really old age or possibly earlier on. That's one thing that can come into play. That probably is the most often thing that people say, by the way, when they say, hey, I want to draw my benefits early, is that they're concerned that they're going to pass away before they would end up breaking even, essentially. And then a big factor, too, is thinking about, are you married or not? And what's the age difference between you and your spouse? Because that can have a big effect. And then whose benefits can the spouse collect? That's a big one as far as thinking about collection strategies and collecting your own benefit versus collecting the spousal benefit. So we'll dig into all of that. So the reason why it's important to think about the age factor with working is that if you took it at age 62, 3, 4, 5 in this case, if you took it before full retirement age, if you made more, this is earned income now. We're not talking about taking money out of your IRAs or drawing money from a pension. We're talking about you actually earning money at work. If you made more than $17,000 this year, you actually would start to have your benefits withheld once you go over that limit. So sometimes people will say, well, that means I lost the money. No, you didn't lose the money. It's just that they're withholding it. They're holding it onto it for you, right? Maybe in Social Security, you'll get it back later when you apply for benefits or when you hit that full retirement age. Actually, is when they refactor it in. You'll get some increase, and then that amount will get amortized out over the rest of your life. I know that gets into the weeds a bit, but more or less, if you think you're going to have any kind of substantial earnings after or before full retirement age, probably not a good idea to start drawing it because of the withholding that you'd experience. So once you reach full retirement age, so that year, for example, the year that the person turns age 66, they can make up to $45,000. They go over the limit, then they start to have a $1 per $3 withheld. And then after full retirement age, nothing is withheld. That's a difference. And it's important to recognize, too, that these rules always change. So that's why a lot of people get confused because they might be thinking of how it worked for their uncle or their dad or whatever people they had talked to that had already started collecting benefits. The rules do change over time. So we need to think about not just what we knew from before, but re-verifying, have the rules changed, in other words. So after full retirement age, you can work as much as you want to. Again, my dad, he's collecting Social Security benefits, but he's also working. They don't take anything out of it. Basically, he gets to collect the full benefit at that point. If you changed your mind, we've actually had this happen before with clients. For example, we've worked with a lot of clients over the years that have had an unexpected departure from a job. It could have been an early retirement package or a downsizing at their company. And they said, all right, well, I've got to drop my Social Security benefits. I think I'm done working. And then lo and behold, 6 months later, 9 months later, they get a phone call from their old boss or their old coworker or somebody who wants them to do some kind of a contract gig, or they just go do something else right on their own when they hadn't intended on working. So there is a way to change your mind. It's not as easy as it used to be. It used to be you could kind of play this game where you could keep applying for benefits and then withdrawing your application, and you kind of go back and forth over time. Now they changed that, so you can only do that once per lifetime, and you would have to do the withdrawal of application within 12 months of starting to receive benefits. So there's a one-time shot. Again, we've had a couple of clients that have done this, and that begs the question, well, why? Why would you want to redo on this? Well, again, it could be because they're in a situation where they're under full retirement age, and so they actually would start to get benefits withheld, and they start thinking that's maybe not what I want to do. I don't really need the money from Social Security now. And the other thing, too, is they may have reconsidered and said, you know what, I've got this other income source, and I had second thoughts. And I really think it would be better because of longevity and my spouse and so forth that I wait until a later age to start collecting benefits. One thing to keep in mind, if you did this, again, you've got the 1 year, but the other thing to keep in mind is that you have to pay back without interest, so you don't have to pay them any interest, but you do have to pay back all the benefits that you've received up until that point. So that's the only way to actually do a withdrawal of application. I want to qualify that because sometimes that's a deal breaker for people. They say, no, I didn't know that. I didn't know I was going to have to write a check, but the reality is you would. So collecting late, here's the good news, is if you waited until after your full retirement age, it's about an 8% increase every year that you wait. So you could get up to a 32% higher benefit by waiting until age 70. However, sometimes people don't, and the reason why, in fact, I'd say most people don't wait until age 70 because they start thinking about longevity, and in their head, they're just thinking, gosh, what if something happens to me, and I don't end up having enough money that I've already collected to make this worth it, or my spouse, maybe they don't live long enough. So people get concerned about that. Also, of course, politics comes into it, and people say, well, gosh, I don't know if I want to wait until age 70 because the politicians are going to mess with my benefits later on, and so I want to take the money early. Obviously, we can't plan based off of that. And at the end of the day, one thing I should say too is that no matter what kind of calculations or illustrations that anybody runs, me or anybody else, at the end of the day, you've got to do what you think makes sense. So we always try to guide you and give you the best education possible to understand all the rules. And so it's collaborative effort, in other words, but ultimately that ends up being your decision. There's never a point where somebody is going to dictate and say, well, this is the right way or this is the wrong way. Obviously, we're making the best decision we can at the time. So looking at a break-even analysis, if this was just a situation where somebody was single and they'd never been married, this gets really, really easy, right? Now it strictly is thinking about one person's lifetime and how long they're going to live. So one thing to think about is that for somebody who took the benefit early, say they took it at 62 and started drawing benefits versus the person that started taking it at age 66 or full retirement age, the person that waited the 4 years, they didn't collect any money during that time frame. So they might want to know, well, how long does it take now for me to break even? How long does it take to pay off? In other words, the fact that I waited and didn't collect those reduced benefits. It's about age 78. And then waiting until age 70, it's about 82 and a half. So that helps a little bit. Again, back to that longevity question, thinking about your health, your family, and maybe how long other people have lived. And of course, it's hard to tell. Usually they say, add 10 years, basically add 10 years to maybe the average of your parents, and that's a reasonable assumption. I don't know, the medical technology and advancements that are happening that really could extend out people's quality of life and life expectancy. So let's talk about the rules now, because it's usually not quite that simple. For those of you who, again, have never been married, never plan to be married, and we're talking about divorces, if you're a widow, anything like that, this all applies. All the rest of the stuff we're going to talk about applies. I would suggest everybody stay on, though, because you might have a friend, you might have a family member that this applies to, even if you are single and have never been married before. But the rules get a lot more complicated if you've got any kind of a marriage situation that you've ever had. Basically, that makes it more complicated. So let's take a look at a couple of examples here. We could spend literally hours, if not days, going through every kind of different example. So that's, again, why I personally want to offer you that. Take advantage of that. We also will offer that if you've got a family member, if you've got a coworker, especially somebody that you think might be interested in working with us, right? Obviously, if they're working with another financial advisor and really happy, then they should go to them. But if you're thinking, you know what, they really should start talking to you guys because you've been helpful for me, and I think you'd be helpful for them as well. So these illustrations are available, no obligation, no charge, but keep in mind that I'm going to run some examples. Make sure you get it done for your scenario. Don't make any decisions just based off of what we're showing here on the illustrations. So let's take a look. Jordan and Alex, so let's say the simple situation would be that we have one spouse that had a earnings record. They had the earnings record to get a Social Security benefit, and the other spouse had never worked. Basically, they don't have a record at all. So the one thing that you should keep in mind is that even if one spouse has never worked, they don't have a single dollar of earnings anywhere on their earnings record, they actually qualify for a spousal benefit. And that spousal benefit is equal to 50% of whatever the full retirement age or primary insurance amount is for that primary earner, that primary partner. So $2,200 is what Jordan gets in this example. Alex doesn't actually get zero, even though that might be what's on her statement or Social Security statement. She actually doesn't get zero. She gets $1,100. So thinking about those benefits, if you wait until full retirement age, if the primary person waits until full retirement age, they would collect their benefit, the $2,200. The rule is now, and this has changed, the rule is now that the person collecting spousal benefits has to wait until the primary earner has applied for their benefits. So this has changed a little bit versus the past. We do have to wait, and only The only way that a spousal benefit can be collected is if the primary benefit's being collected. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And again, because the rules have changed a little bit, again, this is where it's so important to understand the way the rules are now if you haven't started collecting, because it might be different than a coworker, a neighbor, a friend, somebody else that you've spoken to that had a different understanding. So if Jordan started collecting early, again, a reduced benefit, $1,650. So Alex actually could wait and still collect the $1,100. So if she said, you know what, I don't like the idea of collecting early, I want to get my full $1,100 benefit, get the most that I can, she could actually wait until full retirement age. So the maximum spousal benefit amount is at age 66. Reduced benefits, it's actually a little bit more punitive. You can see it's about 8% instead of 7%, so a little bit worse as far as the reduction factor for the spouse to draw early. But there's never an increase after full retirement age. Really, really important. A lot of people do not understand this, and so they might be waiting beyond age 66 to take their spousal benefit. There's never an increase on the spousal benefit after age 66 or after full retirement age. So in other words, you're just leaving money on the table, which is a very nice donation to the federal government, but that's not a good idea to wait beyond age 66. We've actually helped people catch some stuff like this in the past, and literally there are cases that we've helped people understand how it works and maybe correct a misunderstanding on what they were planning to do. Literally tens and tens of thousands in some situations that people end up increasing the amount that they collect just by understanding the rules. And this is easily one. Sometimes people don't understand it, and so they might say, no, we're both going to wait until age 70. We want to wait as long as we can, get the most we can. Can you imagine? Again, that would definitely be in the tens of thousands of dollars easily by that spouse not collecting their benefit during those years. So really important to think about. So again, the benefit would be if Jordan waited until age 70, that would be $2,900. Alex still wouldn't get any more than $1,100. One thing to think about, of course, is it worth it then? Is it really worth it for Jordan to wait, even though Jordan received an increase in benefit of 32%? Then is there really that big of a benefit since Alex had to leave all that money on the table, tens of thousands of dollars? Was it really worth it? In a lot of cases, not, but we can illustrate that. And again, taking money early, so taking a reduced benefit, in this case, Jordan takes a reduced benefit by 25%. Alex's actually would be, because it is worse for the spouse by drawing early, would be reduced by 30%. It would get $770. So some pretty big implications over time. And then file and suspend, that's a little bit different in that file and suspend means that one spouse actually will file for their benefit, which allows the other spouse to collect their benefit. So the $1,100, that actually would mean that, for example, Jordan could wait until age 70, do the $2,900 benefit at that point. So by filing and suspending, Jordan still could get the increase of the 32%, and then Alex actually could take her benefit earlier on, the $1,100. So obviously money left on the table for Jordan during that amount of time. So suspending benefits, again, it's still an option, so that always can be done. Some people are thinking, well, file and suspend, that went away. It didn't completely go away, but the rules changed a little bit. So using an example, one other thing that you could do, and this is where our illustrations will catch all this stuff, right? Because we've got some good software that'll actually help look at your exact situation and catch what the optimal strategy would be to collect. In this case, what if Jordan started collecting the reduced benefit at age 62, but then he suspended the benefit at full retirement age and then started collecting later at the 2100? So the question is, well, really, would you get an increase if you already had collected early, you took the reduction, but then you waited those 4 years in between, and the benefit still goes up, believe it or not. It still goes up by that 8% a year during that time that he wasn't collecting. So, and then at the bottom there, you can see the spouse's implication there. Obviously, by Alex taking it early, $770, the benefit turns off for ALEX as well. I kind of mentioned that before, but the benefit does turn off for that spouse as if the primary earner suspends their benefit, stops taking their benefit, it also turns off for ALEX. So that's where it's important to understand some of these gotchas. So adding spousal benefits to individual benefits, one thing to think about is, well, what if the scenario we ran before where ALEX never had any earnings history, but, well, let's say she did. Let's say she had a small earnings history. So now Jordan's amount's still the $2,200 of full retirement age primary insurance amount. But then ALEX's is $600, and we're assuming spouses that are the same age, by the way. Hopefully you caught that, but to keep it easy, we're assuming that they're both age 66 at the same time. So one thing to think about is that with your own benefit is factored in, but if there's a spousal benefit, the least amount the spouse will get is always going to be 50% of that full retirement age amount for the benefit. So as you can see on here, it does get stacked on. So the spousal benefit actually would stack on top of your own benefit, basically to equal that $1,100. It doesn't necessarily result in a different outcome, but it's important to understand how Social Security is actually factoring this stuff. So in this case, ALEX doesn't actually end up getting any more money, right? It's still $1,100, but it's important to kind of understand it's always the better of the two amounts. So survivor benefits, I think this is changing. It says women are collecting their husband's benefits increasingly. Usually it's because women tend to live longer, not always. Of course, it also tends to be, at least historically, that the husband had a higher earning record. But again, I think this is starting to change. That's what I've noticed with our younger clients in their 20s, 30s, 40s. In a lot of cases, it's not. It doesn't matter. Sometimes it's the wife. Sometimes it's her earnings record is higher. And so I think that we're going to see the dynamics change over time. And who knows? I think it's held for a long time that women on average live longer, but that could change. So it's both of those factors combined. But we looked at our example before that we had the primary insurance amount $2,200 with Jordan, ALEX at $600. So when we take a look at reduced benefits, survivor benefits would be $1,833 that ALEX would collect essentially, or actually it's either one. I should say that if either one of the spouses passes away, it's always the surviving spouse that's going to get the larger amount. But you can see that there was a reduction factor here because benefits started getting drawn at 63 and 6 months. And so it actually ends up reducing the survivor benefit as well, versus had they waited, or had Jordan waited to age 70 and maximized that benefit at $2,900, now the survivor benefit goes to ALEX at $2,900 as well. So the same holds true that when somebody passes away, maybe the best way to think about it is that if either one of the spouses passes away, it's always the greater of the two amounts that the surviving spouse ends up collecting. So in this case, let's say that it's ALEX that passes away. So ALEX's spousal benefit, the $1,100 we were talking about before, that amount drops off now, and Jordan keeps collecting the $2,200. But if it was reversed, then it would be ALEX that would be collecting the $2,200, and her spousal benefit would go away at that point. It's important to think about because when you start thinking about scenarios, and especially in situations where a lot of someone's dependence on retirement income comes from Social Security, can have a pretty big impact, because you think about it, that's like a 33% reduction in their household income if that was all they had. So this becomes critically important. If that's all that somebody had was Social Security, they didn't have any other resources, investments, annuities, pensions, things like that, then this is critically important because that's all they've got to go off of. So let's talk about some collection strategies. And again, we're going to go through these relatively quickly, but there are lots of different ways that we can do this. And I would do this exact same thing for you. In other words, if I had the pieces of information that I asked for before, those dates of birth, and then the three numbers off of your Social Security statement, literally that's all we need to do, kind of a basic illustration. I will tell you that one question that comes up often, especially right now because the market's been kind of crazy, it went way up and now it's way down, is that people say, well, you know what, some of the implication here is that I've got a portfolio And I think my portfolio is going to earn whatever, right? 3%, 5%, 10% on average over time. So how does that factor in? We're not going to do that today because it gets a lot more complicated, but we can play with those numbers and kind of show you that if your investments earned a certain amount and how that would impact when you should draw, in other words, because it can. Another factor is if we were in a true bear market or market collapse like we had back in 2008, 2009, sometimes that actually will trigger some decisions that somebody wouldn't normally make. For example, if somebody's investment portfolio had been really aggressive and it was down by half in 2008, 2009, yet they needed income, they were retiring either because of their own choosing or not, they might actually choose to draw their benefit earlier than what they normally would. So let's take a look. Same people, Jordan and Alex. And so they were born in 1955. And let's say that they've got a staggered life expectancy here where Jordan lives till 75, Alex till 84. So the strategy here is they both collected as early as they possibly could, which would be age 62. So that meant that we had $1,650 per month from Jordan and $450 from Alex. So adjusted spousal benefits led to an increase, so there was a higher amount. Again, we're adding those two amounts together. But at the end of the day, basically the survivor benefits end up being a pretty big chunk of the equation here because Alex lives longer, right? We're living quite a bit longer, and so we've got to factor that in. So the total amount that was collected here, if you add everything up between Jordan's benefits, the survivor benefits, everything, $607,000. So let's hold on to that number, that age 62 collection strategy. So what if they both waited until full retirement age? So now, remember, we said $2,200 a month for Jordan and $600 per month in Alex? No, we said $1,100, right? Yes, that's because we add the two together. So we've got $1,100 coming in under Alex. So now we look at a scenario where they've taken the full retirement age benefit. That leads to collection of $633,000 over time. And now let's go out finally to the age 70 amount for Jordan and $792. No, add the $308 for Alex. So it's at $1,100 a month. So now at the age 70 draw, we can see there was a total of $601,000 of benefits collected. So clearly, the winning strategy here is, if we're just comparing those three simple scenarios, the winning strategy would be both taking it at age 66. Why the difference? Again, why the difference on this? This seems kind of weird, doesn't it? Because sometimes people think, well, no, you wait until age 70. But remember, I mentioned before that because Alex basically didn't get any money by waiting until 70, she didn't get all that money and no increases. There was no incentive, so that was just money out of the window that she could have collected. So let's go back through again. Let's say that we did a hybrid strategy. So let's say that we had this large difference in benefits. Now we've got Jordan waiting until age 70. What if Alex started drawing early? What if she started drawing off of her own record? Remember, because in this case, we're using a kind of the second example where we assume Alex does have her own earnings. And so she starts trying to reduce benefit at age 62. She actually gets $500 extra that she can tack on at age 70 because that's the addition of the spousal benefit that she wasn't eligible for until Jordan applied for his benefits. And so now that hybrid strategy actually ends up winning, and that's $634,320. So, does it edge out a lot what the full retirement amount would be? No, but maybe they kind of liked getting that $450 a month early. Maybe that was really beneficial to them because they were able to go, buy a camper or something like that. And so it added to their budget in those earlier retirement years. So who knows what they did with the money, right? We're not concerned about that right now. But, there's a slight edge to taking that blended strategy. And again, that's what we can illustrate for you by going through those numbers. So overall, we take a look at the overall strategies. The winning strategy ends up being that blended strategy. So restricted application, that's the one that people get a little bit confused about. So restricted application, that's available if you were born before 1953. And that was the old rule, which meant that one spouse could actually they could file and suspend their own benefit, allowing the other person to collect their spousal benefit, and basically over time they would be able to. In this case, we're assuming that Alex had some higher earnings history. So sorry for the confusion, but we're assuming that she had some higher earnings history, and so it allowed her to collect a spousal benefit earlier at age 66, and then switch to her own benefit, let her own benefit go up until 70. We used to use this a lot, so we were kind of bummed about this. This changed a couple of years ago. Got snuck into another financial bill that went through Congress. But yeah, we were definitely bummed about that because it gave people gave people more options basically, and in a lot of cases we were able to collect more money by doing that. So yeah, that strategy, they ended up collecting a lot more money by doing that. And of course, we're talking about two higher earnings records here as well. Widow's benefits. So widow's benefits a little bit different. I mentioned before that a widow can actually collect benefits as early as 60. So as early as 60, they can take a reduced benefit. And we've had some clients that have done this. We've had situations where people have taken that benefit. So in this case, primary insurance amount from Chris here is $2,200. The reduced benefit, the reduced survivor benefit, would be normal benefit would be $2,500 for survivor. It could be taken at $1,788 as early as age 60, or wait longer, take the $2,904 starting at age 70. Again, we can run these comparison points for people as far as how much money would have been collected over time. And again, we can run these same numbers, kind of illustrating some investment returns for the person's portfolio and when the money would have been better off being used. So going back, a couple different things, the filing and suspending versus restricted application. Again, if you were born before January 1st, 1954, there's no way to do the restricted application. In other words, if you're older than that, don't even worry about it. If you're younger than that, that option still might be available to you, which means that both spouses had an earnings record. One spouse files and suspends their benefit. The other spouse takes their spousal benefit and later on switches. That's no longer available. Filing and suspending still is available, but they can't collect any other benefit. So the filer won't be able to claim any other benefit like a spousal benefit or something like that anymore. So there's still some applications for it, but it's not as useful as it used to be. So here's a couple other kind of gotchas that some people don't recognize, and this is where you could be somebody's best friend if you uncover this for them. So let's assume that we had a divorce, right? 50% of marriages end in divorce, happens a lot. Sometimes people have been married multiple times. A couple things to think about. So let's assume that somebody was married at one point. They were married for 10 years or more, but now they're unmarried and they're at least age 62. So we've got that 10 plus years unmarried, and that both of them are actually age 62. So even the spouse that the divorced spouse, both are age 62, and the divorce had to be at least 2 years ago. So that's kind of the landscape here. Survivor benefits are available to an ex-spouse as long as the marriage lasted 10 years. And then actually it doesn't matter. After age 60, the person can be married or unmarried. They could have gotten remarried after age 60, in other words. And then, again, they have to be at least age 60 to collect benefits. The difference on these two is that there is a divorced spouse benefit that's available, and there's also a survivor benefit. So if you have ever been married before and you've had a spouse that passed away, or if you divorced and you're still unmarried, there might be some benefits that you can collect off your ex-spouse's record. This is one that it gets hairy, right? Because it really depends on the situation, again, how long you were married and so forth. But it's important to know that if this was in your past or in the family member's past, they really should talk to Social Security to see what they're eligible for. And when you apply for Social Security, don't worry, they ask you all these questions. They ask you, have you ever been married? Who were you married to? And they'll actually check that person's record to see what you're eligible for. Couple last things here. Taxes. Taxes are pretty important. So we talk about taxes a lot because, again, it's an area where a lot of people misunderstand the tax code. They leave a lot of money on the table. For Social Security, sometimes people think that their Social Security benefits are not taxable. Sometimes people think that their benefits are 100% taxable. The reality is they're actually both right, potentially. And the reason why is that for people that are low enough income, they actually might not be paying any taxes on Social Security. So there's the concept of provisional income, and provisional income is the income used to determine this. In other words, so you would use half of your Social Security benefits plus your modified adjusted gross income, and then that would equal these amounts. So you wouldn't pay any taxes on your Social Security benefits if you were up to the $25K for single, up to the $32K for married, filing jointly. As long as that provisional income was under that, there are no taxes. If you're over that, then it goes up, or up to half of your Social Security benefit could get taxed, and then between 7 and 85% of benefits are taxable over that $34,000 and $44,000 amount. So chances are you will have some of your Social Security be subject to income tax, but there can be some planning involved in that. In some cases, people have the ability to control from year to year where their income is coming from. And it could be that they're trying to stay under certain income amounts. If your spending is low enough that you can make it work, for example, somebody might have an income need of $40,000, and let's say that they're single, $40,000, they can only have up to that $34,000 worth of provisional income. Maybe they're able to take some of the money that they need from sources that have already been taxed. Maybe it's a Roth IRA. Maybe it's a brokerage account, something that's already been taxed. Maybe somebody does something kind of unconventional. They do a reverse mortgage to get income. So there's all kinds of different things that people could do to access some other money if they need to for spending purposes. The other thing to think about, and we deal with this a lot here in Colorado, a lot of people qualify for what are called PERA benefits, PERA. And what that is it's a pension that's a substitute for Social Security benefits. In other words, if somebody was a PERA employee, meaning that they were a teacher, for example, they would actually pay in on their paycheck, they would pay into PERA instead of Social Security. So if their entire work history was with PERA, they wouldn't have any Social Security benefits. They would have PERA benefits instead. We have UC Health. We have hospitals here locally where people pay into what's called a 401A plan, which again is a substitute for Social Security. So those people would also not receive Social Security benefits. So if that's the case, that would be considered a pension, and it could reduce your spousal or survivor benefits. If you were eligible for those, you actually would have some reduction factor. I'm not going to go into detail on it just for sake of time, but just recognize that if you're eligible for a spousal benefit or a survivor benefit, you might actually receive a reduction in that benefit based off of your record, based off of Social Security and pension records and how those combine. Same thing happens is that if that would be based off of your spouse's record. The other thing to think about is your own record. And let's say that you had a career where you were a teacher and then you worked for Lockheed Martin and then you retired. So you actually would have a reduction factor that would play in because you had received, let's say, PERA, and you had a Social Security record through Lockheed Martin. There would be a maximum amount of money that you could receive between the two. So there's a formula, there's a calculator. We can go through that together. But that's one complication, and one thing that oftentimes will come up in these conversations is one spouse or maybe even both spouses had some type of earnings record, whether it be through a railroad retirement or through a nonprofit, through the school system. They might have something that would offset and reduce these benefits. So next steps. Couple things. Again, I'm offering to all of you and actually anybody that you want to send our way, we'd be happy to go through those numbers with them. So it's important to understand the rules. Don't leave money on the table. It's important to understand what choices you have, what are the options. And as we've talked about today, there have been so many items that I brought up that have come up in client conversations where people just don't understand. They don't understand how it works. And so they end up making a decision that's uninformed. They just end up making a decision that maybe not in their best interest. And then finally, incorporating that into the rest of your retirement planning, taking into account not just Social Security, but any pension money you've got, your portfolio, any plans to work during retirement, that's all going to play in, as well as your longevity and your spouse's record. So that being said, I'm going to open it up for questions here. at the end. Want to be respectful of time. For those of you who need to bounce off, no problem. Again, this was recorded today, and so you can go back and look at the recording. We'll post it on our YouTube channel. But also, if there's somebody else that should be listening to this as well or could be useful, let us know. We'll make sure that we get them the link. My email address is josh@keystonefinancial.org. And obviously, they can call the office. My website is www.keystonefinancial.org. Also .com. We actually have both. So if you go to either one of them, they'll go out to our website. So not seeing any questions in the queue right now, but certainly a lot of times these questions that come up are individual anyway, and you might really want to say, well, here's my situation. I really don't want to ask it in front of the group. So here's my situation, and we can kind of talk through it together. So I'll give people just another second here. In the meantime, have a great Christmas, everybody. Have an awesome New Year. Excited about 2019. As always, full of risks, but also full of opportunities for those of us who are keeping an eye out and watching for all the rules and all the strategies that are available. Take care. Enjoy your families, and we will talk to you here in 2019. Thank you.